I will go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk to you about becoming an expert, lessons learned on my analytics journey. Let's start a little bit about me. I'm an expert data analyst, which is a senior manager level individual contributor role at Electronic Arts, EA, which is a video game company. I've been here for 8 years. And prior to that, I did a PhD in genetics. So a little bit nerdy, maybe a lot nerdy. But outside of work, my hobbies include soccer. I'm a huge soccer nut. Anything extreme sports. This picture is from me canyoning in New Zealand last summer, which was one of my favorite things I've ever done. Also, some more low key hobbies like reading and jigsaw puzzles. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about how do you grow your career as an individual contributor. And while this talk is more from my perspective as an individual contributor and as a data analyst, I actually think that the tips I talk about here are relevant for anybody in tech and anybody manager, individual contributor as you're working your way through your career. So I hope this is helpful for more people than just myself or just analysts. And I hope you get something out of it. But people often ask me, how do I go from being a baby programmer to an adult programmer? How do I grow in my career? And I typically say something about adding value because I genuinely think that's the biggest thing that you need to do as you grow in your career. But people, there's a misconception that you have to just work a lot of more hours, do a lot more projects to grow in your career and add more value. And that's not really the case. So today I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that you can add value as an analyst and grow into more senior roles. So, the first, identify your actual job, be the solutions person, and tell the insights story. So, let's start. Identify your actual job. When I started almost 8 years ago, I was so excited to start as an analyst. I was coming out of my PhD and postdoc, and I really thought I knew what my job was. I was like, I'm going to be my best nerd girl self. I am going to look at all the numbers. I'm going to create graphs and do statistics. I might even make some models, who knows? And at the end of the day, I'm going to tell people facts. Like, I'm going to give people so much information about all of their data, and I'm so excited. And I was very ready. But I don't think I realized that's not really what my job was, and it took me actually years to realize that my job was actually helping people make decisions. That was the most important thing that I needed to do as an analyst. And so here I am, more in the background, giving charts and advice and numbers to help people make decisions. I actually think about this very much like maybe a Broadway play or really any play. The set that's behind people, all of the buildings and the props, are really just there to support and enhance the story, but they're not really the star of the show. The star of the show is the actors and the actresses on stage. And so, if a piece is missing from the background or it doesn't get done in time, I mean, the show must go on, but the star of the show is the people, and that just enhances it. Equally, I think of this, the business decision is the star of the show. They're going to make a business decision whether or not you give them any analytics. Uh, but we want to use analytics to support that decision and enhance that decision. So the analytics is the supporting data, but it's not the star of the show. The star of the show is the business decision. So how do we put this into practice? What does this really mean? If somebody comes to me and says, "Hey Janelle, how many total hours were played in game A last year?" Well, I think about it and I'm like, well, it'll take me a week to figure this out because our data's not very clean and it's kind of hard to get to that data and there's a lot of missing data. So I have to figure that out and stuff. But after a week, I can get you a number, the exact number of hours played in game A last year. Let's say that's 6.8 million. What I've learned over the years is in one day, I could get an estimate, let's say around 7 million, one day versus one week. And what I've learned is if this difference of maybe 10% or so between these answers doesn't change the decision, it's not worth all that extra time to get the exact answer. So, if I can get an approximate answer that will help them make the decision they're trying to make in one day, I need to do that because then I can spend the rest of my week working on other work and adding more value rather than spending a whole week to get the exact answer, but it doesn't actually change the decision. So, as much as I like exact numbers, and I do, I've had to really teach myself that I don't always have to get the exact number. So, what do we do about this? I want to encourage you to be intentional about the time you spend on each request. And when you're a baby programmer, all the balls kind of look gray. You're like, I don't know which ones should go in the red bucket or the blue bucket or the green bucket. I don't know how long to spend on these. And that is true. But with practice, and mostly I mean trial and error, I did a lot of trial and error. I typically overestimated and I would do way more than I needed to do to answer a question. And over time, I've been able to shorten that and start to try, okay, well, what if I try this simple thing first? And then I give that to a stakeholder and we discuss it. And if it's not enough, I can do more. But if it is enough, great. I just saved a bunch of time. So by practice, I mean trial and error. But eventually you'll get to the point where you kind of just know which requests are red and will only take an hour or two, which ones are blue, and which ones are green and will take a week or even more. A lot of my projects these days take maybe 2 or 3 months, and that's okay too. But be really intentional about the time you spend on each request. Sometimes you do need an exact answer, whether it's for internal stuff, maybe A/B tests, they're small margins. Maybe you're presenting external data to investors, it has to be exact. But the idea is just be very intentional about it. Because remember, your job is to help people make decisions. Your job is not to get the exact right number. All right, number two, be the solutions person. So I want to challenge you all to push past the initial impulse to say, it's not possible. No, we don't have that data. No, we can't do that. And try and figure out a way. So if the stakeholder comes and says, can you get me A, B, and C? You might be sitting there looking at these like, well, I have these like straight lines. I could probably make an A, but how am I going to make a B or a C? I can't really curve these. Instead of just saying, no, I can't do that, what if you come back with an alternative? Does X, Y, and Z work? I can make an X, Y, and Z out of this. And maybe that doesn't work, but most times it will. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that works for what I need. Remember, you're trying to help them make decisions. So I want you to push past that initial impulse in your brain to be like, no, I don't have that exact data, or there's no way I could get an exact answer, and try to be the solutions person. Try to find some way to help them. So, 2 steps to this. First, very importantly, clarify what the request is. This happens all the time to me. The stakeholder will come and say, how many people did A? How many people did a thing? And I'm like, okay, yeah, I could answer that. But when I like wind my way back and talk to them and say, okay, what are you trying to solve? Where's this question coming from? What are you using this for? I wind my way all the way back and figure out the decision they're trying to make is, do we continue to put resources into this feature? Are enough people using it? Well, maybe the right question is not how many people did a thing. And so I might come back and say, well, actually, we could better understand that by looking at X and Y instead. And I want to start that dialogue of, okay, how can we actually look at this? As an analyst, you know your data, you know what's easy to get and what's not easy to get, and you know how that data interacts with the business better than your stakeholders do. And so they think that they're doing you a favor. They're not trying to be rude. They think they're doing you a favor by asking a very specific question. But usually you can wind it back and figure out what they're actually asking and then figure out how to approach that. So that's step one. Step two, be creative. A lot of people think analytics is not creative, and I disagree. You guys would be maybe surprised at the wild things I do with data to be able to answer questions and help people make decisions. So, can you get an approximate answer, estimate somehow? Can you use a sample? Maybe if your data is too big or you don't have it all. Can you use completely different data to just learn something about this? So be creative. How do we put this into practice? What does this look like? So let's say a stakeholder comes and asks me, do players spend more time in the game if they purchase the game at a higher price? Let's assume that we've already done step one. We've already clarified the request and we've decided and agreed this is the question that is the right one to answer for what they're trying to do. Well, I'm going to look at our data and immediately say, well, we can't determine how much each user spent to buy our game. I mean, imagine you went to Target or Walmart or anywhere and bought a video game and then you go and put it in your Xbox to play it. There's no way I'm going to know how much you spent on that game. So we don't have that data. And the immediate response might be, nope, we don't have that data. Sorry, nothing we can do. But again, we don't want to do that. We want to be the solutions person. We want to help. So, is there something I can think about that we could maybe estimate this? And I know that our finance team, for instance, has the average weekly sale price of our games. So each week, the average price that that game sold for. And I know that my team has data on the first week that each user played the game, first time we saw them, and the total hours they've played in the game. And so, while this isn't perfect, in theory, somebody could buy a game or it was maybe bought for them as a gift and it's not the same week that they played it. It's probably a decent estimate to get us some understanding. So, if we look at every user, their first week they played, apply the average sale price that week to them, and look at their hours played, look, we can do an analysis on that now. Is it perfect? No. But does it help them make the decision? Probably yes. A whole lot more than we got nothing. So I challenge you to be the solutions person. Try to find some way to help them, even if it's not exactly what they're asking for. Remember, you're trying to help them make decisions, and some data and some insights is better than literally nothing. All right, on to our third tip, share the insights story. So let's roll it back again. When I started as an analyst about 8 years ago, this is what I would do when I was sharing my results with stakeholders. First, I would do the analysis, do all my different tasks, look at this, analyze this. Then I would go to present my analysis to stakeholders. I'd start with the question that we were answering, always good, remind them what you're answering. Then I would walk them through, generally speaking, what I did. Well, I looked at this, and I looked at this, and I looked at this. Then I would show some data. Okay, this is what we've learned. Then I would tell them about how I ran into some problem because this happened on every single project. It still happens on every single project I do. I tell them all about how I ran into a problem. We didn't have the data, or the data was messed up, or this didn't work, or whatever. And then I'd be like, "Don't worry, though. I fixed it. I did this, this, and this workarounds, and don't worry. We can figure it out and salvage it. And we got some more data. It's all right." And then I'd show more data. I'd be like, "Ta-da! Wasn't that so insightful? Wasn't that great?" And it was great. I am very proud of the presentations I gave 8 years ago. However, at the end of the presentation, I would get so many questions about these areas, which was my methodology, what was wrong with the data, and how I fixed it. And I would get almost no questions about the data and the insights itself, which is really what the business needs and what we should be discussing. So, what do I do today? So, I still do my analysis, hopefully, maybe a little better. I have 8 years of experience, but that's not for today. Now, before I get to the presentation, and this is actually probably what takes most of my time, I lay out everything that I've analyzed and all the graphs I've made, which is usually way too many. And I look at everything I have and all the insights and all the things, and I try to figure out what are the two or three things that I want the audience to walk away knowing. Two or three. I didn't say seven. I didn't say 12. I didn't say five. Two or three. What are the two or three things I want the audience to walk away knowing? And so those are my key insights. And then I derive my whole presentation around that. So I derive my key insights. I create some simple visuals to share those. Simple. That's a whole other topic, but simple visuals to communicate those key insights. And honestly, I leave a bunch of what I've done on the cutting room floor. If it doesn't pertain to those key insights, it's not important for the story. And as much as it pains me, I have to just leave it. I do put some stuff in the appendix, of course, if questions come up, but honestly, a lot of the stuff I does do never even makes it into the slides. So, what does my presentation look like today? I still start with my question. I then go straight into the key insights and I tell the story of the insights. This is what we're learning rather than the analytical story in order of, well, I looked at this and I looked at this and I looked at this. This is all about the insights. Like, this is what we've learned from the analysis, probably leaving out half of the things I looked at because they weren't really that important. Now I'm getting discussion about the insights and about the data and about what this means for our business. Ta-da! I'm sure I'll look back in 10 years and think that I was still doing this probably all wrong, but I like to see that I've made some growth and that I've learned a little bit better how to communicate with my stakeholders and really share the insights and not the analytics. So, how do we put this into practice? What does this look like? We're going to pretend for a second that we're a financial analyst, and somebody comes to me and says, "My salary is $80,000 a year. Given my bills, can I go on vacation next year?" So, what I would have done the old way is I would have written out all of their bills that they gave me and all of the amounts and added them all up and walked them through this and said, "Okay, given all of your bills, it's $4,500 a month that you need to pay in bills. Well, if we start with your salary, we take out taxes, we take out your bills, so the 44,500 times 12, we take all of that out, we're left over with $6,000. So yes, you can go on vacation." Ta-da! That's what I would do in the old way. But again, that's walking through the analytics. For the most part, my stakeholders trust, and I promise they trust you as well. They trust that you can do analytics and that you're smart and that you know how to do math and they're paying you to be an analyst. They don't really need to be walked through all of the steps that you've done. They really want to talk about the insights and talk about the business and what this means. So now what I'll do, the new way, is I'll just say, Given your bills, you'll have $6,000 left over. We don't need to walk through all that. But now I'll start to drive discussion by asking questions. What about retirement? Have you thought about putting more away in a retirement fund? Are there any causes close to your heart that you want to donate to? When you think about vacation, have you thought about what type of vacation? Maybe a weekend away at the beach that might only be $1,000, or a week-long Europe trip that might be $3,000 or $4,000. So this is a way that I can start to drive discussion by telling the insight story. Granted, telling them they have $6,000 left isn't much of an insight story, but I think asking them the questions, really pulling the stakeholders in, is this something you expected? What do you think this means for our business? Tell the insight story to encourage discussion. All right. I just threw a lot of stuff at you. Let's roll it all back to where we started. How do I grow my career as an individual contributor? How do you go from baby programmer to adult programmer? And what we learned is it's all about added value. And we talked about 3 ways that I've learned to do that. Identify your actual job. In my case, this is helping people make decisions, not just doing good math. Be the solutions person, help people find a way to do something that they can use and discuss, and tell the insight story rather than the analytics story. Thank you so much for your attention. I really enjoyed putting this talk together, and I hope you all got as much out of it as I got out of it creating it. And we have, I think, just 2 minutes, so I can quickly check if there are any questions in the Q&A.
I don't think there were any in the Q&A, but there was a, yes, let's see.
When should we define the metric of interest or KPI, which can help in making that decision? It's a really good question. I think the ideal answer is as soon as possible. The realistic answer is that it probably will change actually as you go through the analytics process, the discussion process with your stakeholder. Often I think that the metric that they'll need and they think is very different than what it ends up in once we look at the data a little bit, understand in our case player behavior, but it could be anything in your case. So be flexible, be willing to have an open mind and change what you think that metric should be, but you should have that top of mind kind of throughout the discussions of what that metric or KPI should be.